2024 will be the biggest election year in history. More than 60 countries representing half the world's population are going to be going to the polls. Notably, both the US and UK will vote, shaping not just their own fate, but the world's too. As Trump's potential candidacy for 2024 looks ever more likely, the efforts to remove him from the ballots raise a critical question. Could these attempts inadvertently play into his favour, actually bolstering his appeal among supporters and contributing to a narrative that fuels his political resurgence? Well, joining me to discuss this from Florida is the political strategist and pollster Frank Luntz. Also, here in London, Talk TV's international editor Isabel Oakeshott, along with lawyer and writer Chris Dorr. Thanks so much for being with me, everyone. First of all, let me come to you, Frank Luntz. I think a lot of people watching might be surprised by the possibility that Donald Trump might be making a return to the White House this year, but it looks possible, yes?
It looks, not only does it look possible, but at this point, if the election were held today, it actually looks likely. Donald Trump has been gaining over the last 4 months. The more indictments, the higher his numbers climb. The more condemnation, the higher his numbers climb. And you try to throw him off the ballot, his favorability actually increases. There's a level of intensity, a level of commitment among his voters that does not exist for any other candidate. So I'd have to say at this point, Great Britain, get ready because Donald Trump may return.
And you think that if Trump does get the Republican nomination, I mean, he's still, if you add all the other candidates together, they still don't add up to the amount of approval among the base that Donald Trump has. So it seems like a dead cert unless he's somehow knocked out through legal reasons or something. But you're saying that you think that if it's Biden versus Trump, a replay wearying as it seems of 2020, you think that the current polls, Trump beats Biden?
At this point, based on where the economy is, based on foreign policy issues, based on what's happening in the Middle East, and by the way, I'm so glad to do this because, sir, you are a hero in America. They appreciate you. They're grateful for you speaking up. And I realize that this isn't quite what this segment is about, but I wanted to do it to thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for your courage, for your conviction, for telling the truth. And that is what Trump's people think of Donald Trump. We can disagree with him, but make no mistake, his people believe that Donald Trump tells the truth. They believe it's a witch hunt. They believe he's a victim. They believe this is a persecution. And that's why they back him so strongly.
Well, thank you very much for that, Frank Luntz. I'll come back to you, but just with me in the studio, Isabel Oakeshott, if Donald Trump does become president again in 2024, what does that mean in Britain? Because this country's government doesn't seem prepared for it, and a Labour government certainly wouldn't be.
Well, it means a rollercoaster ride. I mean, what it would hopefully mean is that the UK-US relations become a little bit more important again. I mean, Trump is an Anglophile. He loves this country. He loved the Queen. He's very pro the UK. Again, it might raise some hopes of a UK-US trade deal, which seems to have dissipated. So I think in theory it would be a good thing. But that said, if we have a Starmer government, you know, probably less so.
Well, I was going to say, coming to you, Chris Dorr, I mean, if Labour were to win the election this year, and all of the polls would seem to suggest that, if Trump was in the White House and Starmer's in number 10, what does the special relationship look like?
Well, I think the more important thing is it's frankly astonishing that anyone thinks that a dangerous sociopath and a proven and a habitual liar like Donald Trump would be a good thing for anyone, particularly someone who as it expresses himself in so many dangerous ways about world affairs, and particularly his affinity for Vladimir Putin and so forth. So I think it's...
that is so exaggerated, the whole Putin thing. I mean, it's such an old and lazy trope as well. I'm sorry to bring up the whole, Trump's really pro-Russian. I mean, honestly, I mean, are we going to really replay this whole thing again?
Well, we're not replaying it because the fact of it is it's a truth which it's uncomfortable for people. But you're right, it's one of the many hundreds and hundreds of problems with Trump as a politician.
Actually, Chris, what you just said, I mean, there was a whole thing about the Russiagate conspiracy in the US. There were investigations and so on. It came up with a great big nothing burger. I mean, isn't part of the problem, whatever your views on it, I mean, that all the allegations, there are plenty of criticisms you can make of Donald Trump, but whenever you get into the kind of, Russian collusion sort of stuff, isn't that exactly the sort of thing that makes voters
you're
do what
absolutely
Frank
right.
Luntz is pointing to, which is they say, everyone's been lying about this guy. We don't believe anything that the media says. We don't believe anything the commentators say. We're just going to stick with him because he's our guy.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And what that says about the vacuum in our politics, not just in the United States, but in the United Kingdom, is really tragic, isn't it? That we have an octogenarian, or almost one, we have an octogenarian president, neither of whom really are fit to govern, remotely fit to govern anything, let alone the most powerful country in the world. Where are the young people? Where are the dynamic, inspirational leaders who can appeal to the whole of the population rather than just narrow partisan interests?
Well, I want to bring Frank Luntz back in on that because, Frank Luntz, if you've just been listening to that, we do have young leaders in the UK compared to America. Not everyone in UK politics has to be an octogenarian. But would you say that the youth that is on Rishi Sunak's side and slightly on Keir Starmer's side as well, do you think it's an electoral advantage for either of them?
I don't think it gives an advantage, but most certainly if you're as old as Joe Biden and have trouble completing sentences and doing press conferences and all the things that we expect of a presidential candidate, I've heard that the strategy, you can see him moving off that plane very quickly. That's not what he does in most of the appearances. People watch him and they think, thank you, sir, for your governance. Thank you for putting America back on the right track, but it's time for you to go.
But if he does go, Frank Luntz, I mean, isn't the problem that, for the Republicans have quite a bit of talent actually underneath Donald Trump, in my view. There's a lot of experienced governors and others. It seems that underneath Joe Biden in the Democratic Party, there's very little. I mean, they're not going to run Kamala Harris, are they? I mean, she's got roughly the same approval ratings as the Ebola virus.
Yes, that's a very good line. She's the least popular vice president since Dan Quayle, and he was the least popular vice president since Aaron Burr. You're correct. She is not going to be, by the way, that's how I can tell if anybody watched the play Hamilton. She is not going to be the nominee. But there is Cory Booker, the senator from New Jersey. There's
Gavin Newsom.
Gavin Newsom. These are people from the next generation. Any of these candidates would run better against Donald Trump than Joe Biden. So we have to wonder, why don't they give someone else who's younger the chance?
Well, the truth of it is ego, I'm afraid, and the hunger for power at all costs on the part of President Biden, which is utterly tragic for the American people, but sadly is likely to lead to an inevitable consequence.